Well, good day. This is Paul Smith with Marin Fire History. Now, us at Marin Fire History, we generally present articles to you about the past fire service history in Marin County, and we try to preserve that history. We recently completed an article about the Marinwood Fire Department, and then, to our surprise, a news piece broke that might be history in the making. You see, auto aid and shared services agreements between the Marinwood Fire Department and the San Rafael Fire Department have been in existence since about 1973. But recently, a proposal was made to put together a three-step transition for consolidation between the two departments, Marinwood and San Rafael Fire Department. So we could see a merger in the next 3 years or so of Marinwood Fire Department. So this is Paul Smith with Marin Fire History, and we hope you enjoy this upcoming article about the Marinwood Fire Department. Thank you and be safe. Well, good day, and welcome to another episode of Marin Fire History. I'm retired Fire Chief Paul Smith, and today we've got a unique experience to share with you today. I have as my guests Chief Marcucci, retired from San Rafael, and Chief Waterbury, also retired from San Rafael. And for some time, Marin Fire History has been interested in bringing you the unique story of the Marinwood Fire Department. And Brian Waterbury did quite a bit of research on the history of that department. And we're going to start with Brian this morning. Good morning, Chief Waterbury, and welcome to Marin Fire History.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're here today, and you've done some research on Marinwood. So if you wouldn't mind, why don't we kick it off?
Sure. Well, Marinwood Fire Department was established about mid-'60s officially. The whole area of Marinwood was purchased from family of Don Timoteo Murphy. It was a Spanish land grant, and Don Murphy had ownership there. It was a ranch. And in 1955, the family sold off the ranch for development. And shortly thereafter, developers came in and started putting in houses along Lucas Valley Road. It was the start of a suburb of San Francisco. Most of the families in there, as it grew, were young. They had a lot of children. Usually, the dads either worked locally or they were commuting to San Francisco and back. Anything else?
Yeah, it started out as a community, but as you mentioned, it wasn't in the city of San Rafael, and it was south of the city and fire district in Novato. So
Yeah.
they were a little bit back in 1960, Brian, a little bit in no man's land, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. They were probably around 4 miles south of Novato and about 4 miles north of San Rafael. So they were out there pretty much by themselves. They eventually realized that as their community was growing, as it was developing, that they needed safety services. They formed a community services district, and that community services district allowed them to go on the ballot and vote for bond measures to support their soon-to-be fire department, their parks, their recreation, street lights. Just in the process of developing a really strong and safe community for all these new families.
Sure. So we had didn't form a city, didn't have a city charter, wasn't a they formed a community services district, or we call a CSD, that, as you mentioned, provided several services to the community, had a Parks and Recs department, the fire department, and I believe they still relied on the sheriff's department for law enforcement.
They did, and actually, CSD, I would have the Marin County Fire Department as their fire responders. The Marinwood area, I don't know if many people know this, but Lucas Valley and Marinwood were two separate entities early on, and the county fire department did have a fire station in Upper Lucas Valley, but and when the Marinwood would have major fire, they would call in mutual aid at that time, which was the county fire department would come in with usually a fire engine with maybe one firefighter.
So,
but it was shortly after they formed their community services district that they started to develop their fire department. It's pretty rudimentary at the beginning. I think there was only one paid person at the time. That was the fire chief, a gentleman by the name of Chief Ray. And the rest of it was all done by volunteers.
Okay. And they had volunteer training, I would imagine.
They did.
And some pretty basic equipment, I would think, initially, huh?
They did. They had, from my understanding, it was a Crown fire engine that they got used. There was some interaction at the time. The Hamilton Air Force Base was an active Air Force station, and there was some mutual benefit for the Marinwood and Hamilton Air Force Base.
Okay.
And so they did get some rudimentary equipment, but it kind of kept pace with the development of the community.
Sure.
And they did have they trained once a week, and they had a really very active volunteer program. Probably 20 to 30 active volunteers at any given time.
Sure. And a lot of departments in Marin County back in the 60s started that way, Brian. And we're fortunate enough to have several of their early pieces of fire apparatus. You happened to mention they had a working relationship with Hamilton Air Force Base and Marin County Fire Department. And I'm wondering if that early brush rig that we see up there now could have been Army surplus or military surplus. It sure looks like it to me.
Yeah, I think it was. I think that was. I think they bought that for $1 or something like that. It was a piece of equipment, old equipment from Hamilton Air Force Base.
Okay.
I think they realized very soon that they needed something for brush fire, because that whole community is surrounded by wildlife.
Sure. And then we have a shot of their early Type 1 Marin Fire History did an article recently about Van Pelt fire engines in Marin County, and that was an example of one right there. And we'll go on to the next slide, which shows another photograph of their earlier apparatus. There we have another Van Pelt.
Yeah,
Now, Brian, when did it evolve? If you could see, we see the evolution of the equipment. When did it evolve into a paid chief with volunteer firefighters and bringing in a paid staff, a full-time engine company, and a full-time fire chief?
yeah. Well, that all happened. The original chief was a paid position, and so when they first started the fire department, they did have a chief. He wasn't. They could only afford so much, but they did have the chief. And if I can go back just one step, it's very interesting. Before they had a fire station, the fire engine would be taken home by the fire chief and it would be parked in his driveway. And their communications was all by telephone. They didn't have a CAD system. Didn't have the incident command system. So the call would come in, and the chief's wife would act as dispatcher and call up all their volunteers. But if the chief was out of town or went on vacation, then one of the volunteers or experienced volunteers would take that fire into the park and clean his driveway. So I thought that was very interesting.
Sure.
How they did that.
Yeah. Not unlike Fleming's station down in Santa Venetia or out in Tamales. They had what they called a resident firefighter. The firefighter actually had the apparatus at his house in his garage. So, and that was the way it was in the 60s. We talk about this today, and people can't believe what the system was like back then. But it was a growing community that none of that had been developed yet. So,
no, and it was definitely the fire department in Marinwood was definitely a community entity. Really supported. People participated. They would have pancake breakfasts. They'd have chicken barbecues, and so really the whole fire department became kind of a pivotal point, which people gathered around. Yeah, so really ownership was and still is to an effect really important to the residents of Marinwood.
yeah, and that was a small community then. It was, like we mentioned before, they were a little bit isolated by today's standards, and they really made the most of it. And you mentioned the community came together not only as a community provided volunteer firefighters for the fire apparatus back then, and they trained together. They did fundraisers together, and you have to remember they have the community center there too. So it very well back in 1960s and 1970s. I recall very tight organization as you mentioned. So I'll bring up the next slide that has a list of some of the Marinwood fire chiefs that have served in the past, and I'd like to at this time introduce Fire Chief Bob Marcucci from San Rafael, and Bob would like to talk a little bit with us this morning about how Marinwood eventually evolved and grew and developed a very strong relationship with their neighbor to the south, San Rafael Fire Department. And I believe Chief Marcucci was instrumental in some of those cooperative agreements, like boundary drops and mutual aid that were, I don't want to say unique, but necessary and increased the level of service to the community. So, good day, Chief. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And would you like to talk a little bit this morning about how Marinwood grew and their their initial cooperation and current cooperation with Santa Fe and Santa Fe Fire Department?
Sure, be happy to. Before I get there, though, I think it's important to understand that the area of Marinwood was under the jurisdiction of the Marin County Fire Department, and in my opinion, should have been a Marin County fire station. But at the time, the fire chief was getting money from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and he felt that they were a wildland fire department, now the structural fire department. If he just thought they were a structural fire department, he would have put a station at Marinwood, and Marinwood Fire Department would not have existed. It would have been the Marin County Fire Station. But he didn't. And so Marinwood was left out trying to make a decision on how to provide fire protection when, in fact, the Marin County Fire Department could have done it if the chief felt that they were a structural department rather than a wildland department. Um, when Santa Fe hired a training officer, his name was Gay Bonfield, and Gay came from the East Bay at the Pittsburgh steel mill. And he was in Santa Fe for a couple of years and then became the chief of Marinwood. And Gay and I had a strong relationship. And as soon as he became chief, we decided that we should drop boundary lines. The Marinwood station was 600 feet from Mount Marin subdivision in Santa Fe and 900 feet from 12 Oak Hill subdivision. And yet Santa Fe was not using Marinwood, so we dropped boundary lines. And Marinwood started to respond into Mount Marin, 12 Oak Hills up to Skyview Terrace, and east to Highway 101. And for that, then Santa Fe would provide a couple of engines for structure fires and dispatch services. So it was, in those days, it was sort of unique that the fire department would have someone else answer their calls. But when you really think about it, people didn't care what your arm pad said. All they cared about was someone was there to provide service to them. And Marinwood did an excellent job. There were some concerns, were they as good as Santa Fe firefighters? And they were excellent firefighters and cared deeply about their community and cared deeply about the level of service that they were providing. And so that relationship built over time. Then in 1980, Santa Fe implemented paramedic service, and after a few years, it became evident that we needed the second unit. The first unit was south of Port Swallow Hill, nothing north of Port Swallow Hill. So we knew we needed something north of Port Swallow Hill. When CSA 19 was formed, what's at the unincorporated areas in Santa Fe, the station for the unincorporated area, CSA 19, was established politically at the Civic Center. So you had the Civic Center fire station, and 3/4 of a mile up the road was Santa Fe Station 3. And then north of that, another mile was the Marinwood Station. So with the number of vacancies that we had in the department at that time, we converted those vacancies to paramedic service. At that time, going on to the paramedic budget rather than the city budget, saving the city almost $1 million in doing that, and then contracting with Marinwood to provide fire protection to that area north of Station 3, Lucas Valley Road to Northgate Industrial Park. And we paid for the third person on their engine. So the relationships grew. And remembering that the paramedic service was for paramedic service area B, which included Marinwood, Santa Fe, and all the unincorporated areas. So the relationship grew as we were responding in for those medical calls. So to this day, when we deactivated Station 3, then Marinwood responded east to where the golf course is today, Northgate Industrial Park, and north to Novato. And it's an excellent way of providing fire protection and at a great savings to the residents. The response times were probably Marinwood going into 12 Oak Hills was 3-4 minutes at the most. Santa Fe was 6 or 7 minutes. So it made a major difference. And it was through the cooperation of Gay Bonfield that we were able to do some innovative things in those days when dropping boundary lines was unique.
And here we are today with consolidated dispatch and closest engine responding. So we've come a long way from 1960 when Marinwood Community Services District started all by itself with a paid fire chief and used equipment that they could get their hands on. And today, if we could have the last slide, Marinwood is very well integrated with Santa Fe. They're well integrated with the fire service community in Marin County, and still continue to provide excellent service to their community. And like we mentioned at the beginning of our show today, Community Services District is very unique, and I'd like to thank Brian Waterbury and Bob Marcucci today for joining me in explaining the history of that and how it worked and how it continues to work today, even though it's a unique agency. That doesn't mean they're any less than anybody else out there. So my hat's off to Brian for the initial research with several members of Marinwood, and Chief Marcucci, of course, for his research and his time in the seat as a fire chief in Santa Fe, developing these relationships. And on we go. So I'd like to thank Marin Fire History and our sponsors, Marin County Fire Chiefs Association. And we hope you've enjoyed this piece on Marinwood Fire Department.